Welcome back to Horror Movie Madness Marathon Month. Today's movie is From Beyond from 1986. This is more of a sci-fi horror film, and it really is something else. I'd never seen it before. I had heard of it, but this was my first time watching it, and I'm glad I did. It was freaking awesome. The film was directed by Stuart Gordon and is based on an H.P. Lovecraft short story by the same name. It's about two scientists, Dr. Edward Pretorius and his assistant, Dr. Crawford Tillinghast, played by Ted Sorel and Jeffrey Combs respectively. They've been working on a type of machine called a resonator that is supposed to stimulate the pineal gland in the brain. The theory is that doing so will allow humans to see beyond the normal range of perception, basically tapping into a dormant sixth sense. Right at the beginning of the movie, Crawford activates the machine and begins to see strange creatures. He brings in Pretorius, who loses himself in the experience and gets his head eaten by something from the other side. All this causes a huge disturbance, which is reported by the neighbors. The cops show up and arrest Crawford. They accuse him for the murder of Pretorius and have him committed to a psychiatric ward on account of how crazy his story sounds. He's visited by Dr. Catherine McMichaels, played by Barbara Crampton, who assesses him, and after a CAT scan she discovers his pineal gland is enlarged. Intrigued by this, along with his story, she has Crawford released into her custody and convinces him to reactivate the machine to prove his innocence. They're joined by Detective Bubba Brownlee, played by Ken Foree, and head back to the house to rebuild the resonator. They manage to do so and activate it only to discover that Pretorius isn't dead. Somehow, instead, he managed to cross over to the other side and now inhabits the powerful body of the creature that killed him. It seems that Pretorius has transcended to a parallel plane of enhanced sensory pleasure, and he wants nothing more than to bring them over to the other side with him. It's up to the trio to stop him and try to keep from losing themselves to the sensory intoxication. That and being killed by horrific creatures from beyond. The first thing that really stood out to me in this movie were the practical effects. They're awesome. They were mostly done by John Carl Buechler, who is also known for a lot of other films such as Reanimator, Halloween 4, and A Nightmare on Elm Street 4. The effects are perverse, gross, and really help make the movie unsettling. I think they do a good job of representing the Lovecraft inspiration and giving us a realistic depiction of creatures from an unseen parallel universe. If it was done with CGI today, it just wouldn't be the same. It's hard to get that freak-out factor when there's nothing actually there. One of my favorite examples is right after Catherine activates the machine for the second time. Pretorius appears and he's changed quite a bit, all mutated and disgusting. I distinctly noticed that there was fluid leaking from the orifices on his body, and I thought that was nasty as hell, but appreciated the detail. Shortly after, Pretorius grabs Catherine and elongates his hands to fondle her. He's always changing and mutating throughout the movie, but that segues into my next discussion point, which is the hypersexualization in the film. We've established that in the movie, the resonator stimulates the pineal gland to unlock dormant sensory perception in the brain. Not only does this allow the characters to perceive entities they normally would never know existed, but it also makes them all really horny. At one point, this overwhelms Catherine and she goes full-on dominatrix in Dr. Pretorius' sex dungeon. I'm not sure why that's there, and it has nothing to do with the original short story, but what's a good 80s horror movie without some nudity? As I mentioned, the film is based on a short story by H.P. Lovecraft, also titled From Beyond. I read the story, and the movie actually sticks pretty close to the source material, minus the sex. At least the beginning of the film does anyway. The rest of it is more of an elaboration on it. There are a few differences. For example, there is no Dr. Pretorius in the story, but instead the main antagonist is Crawford Tillinghast. So in the film, Pretorius is portraying Crawford as he is in the story. The narrator of the story seems to be more like Crawford as depicted in the film. He goes to see Crawford at his house/lab. Crawford activates the machine and shows him things from beyond, then dies, and the narrator is investigated for his death but isn't charged. This is basically the same thing that happens at the beginning of the film, but they use that as a jumping off point for the rest of the movie. So they took the original short story as the basis, changed a few things, and continued the narrative further than the original went. I think it did a good job of building and expanding on the source material. The idea that there could be a whole hidden universe that we can't perceive is both fascinating and horrifying. Who knows what's lurking out there, moving among us unseen? Would it be possible to bridge the divide and enhance our senses so we can experience perception in a way never done by humans before? Should we do that even if we could? These are just a few of the questions that come to mind, and obviously From Beyond explores the more terrifying possibilities. If you haven't seen it, I'd recommend you check it out. It's a great horror film with awesome practical effects, and I loved it. Definitely a good choice. So be sure to come back and join me for more movie reviews as I keep rolling on through Horror Movie Madness Marathon Month. Happy Halloween!